I, 28F, lost my dad when I was 12. He was everything to me, my hero, my best friend, and the person who always made me feel safe. Dad was a high school history teacher, and he had this incredible way of making the past come alive. He'd tell me bedtime stories about ancient civilizations and great explorers, sparking my love for history and adventure. We had this special tradition where every Sunday, we'd go on a dad-daughter date to Scoops, our favorite ice cream shop. It was a tiny place, family-owned for generations, with peeling paint and worn boots, but to us, it was magical. Dad always got Rocky Road, and I'd spend ages deliberating before inevitably choosing bubblegum. We'd sit for hours, him helping me with homework or listening to me ramble about my latest obsession, be it dinosaurs, space, or Greek mythology. Mom was always supportive of our little outings. She worked as a nurse, often taking night shifts, so she saw these Sundays as a chance for her to catch up on sleep while Dad and I bonded. It was a perfect balance, our little family of 3. But everything changed when Dad got sick. It started with headaches, then dizziness. I remember the day he collapsed in the kitchen, Mom's frantic voice calling 911. The diagnosis came like a thunderbolt: brain tumor. Inoperable. Terminal. The next few months were a blur of hospital visits, whispered conversations, and me pretending not to notice how Mom's eyes were always red-rimmed. Dad tried to keep our spirits up, insisting on our ice cream dates even when he was too weak to leave the hospital. I'd sneak in pints of Scoops ice cream, and we'd share them in his room, laughing at how we were breaking all the rules. When Dad passed, it felt like the world stopped spinning. I was lost, adrift in a sea of grief I couldn't comprehend. Mom was devastated. She threw herself into work, often leaving me with my Aunt Tessa, 50F, who lived nearby. Tessa became like a second mom to me during those tough years. She'd pick me up from school, help with homework, and even try to keep up the ice cream tradition, though it wasn't the same without Dad. Tessa had her own story of loss. She'd lost her husband, Uncle Mike, in a car accident just a year before Dad got sick. I think that's why she understood my grief so well. She never tried to replace Dad or make me get over it. Instead, she'd share stories about Uncle Mike, and we'd laugh and cry together. It was with Tessa that I learned it was okay to miss someone and still find joy in life. Things started to change when I was about 15. Mom began dating again, which I understood. She deserved to be happy. But then she met Richard, 56M. At first, he seemed nice enough. He'd bring flowers for Mom, ask about my day, and even offer to help with my college applications. But something about him just felt off. Richard was a successful businessman, always impeccably dressed in suits that probably cost more than our monthly rent. He had a way of making everything sound like a business transaction, even relationships. When he talked about Dad, it was always in terms of moving on and fresh starts, as if Dad was a failed investment we needed to write off. As time went on, I noticed Mom changing. She started canceling our plans last minute, saying Richard had surprised her with concert tickets or a weekend getaway. She'd forget important events in my life, like my debate team finals or my art showcase. It hurt, but I tried to be understanding. After all, she'd been alone for so long. The real problems started when I was 17. Richard moved in with us, and suddenly our house didn't feel like home anymore. He rearranged everything, got rid of Dad's old armchair, claiming it was ratty, and even suggested we should update the living room by taking down the family photos. Mom agreed to all of it. I tried to talk to Mom about how I was feeling, but she'd always brush it off. "Honey, you're just not used to change," she'd say. Or, "Richard's just trying to help us move forward." It felt like she was choosing him over me, over the memory of Dad. One day, I came home to find that Richard had cleaned out the garage, including a box of Dad's old teaching materials I'd been saving. When I confronted Mom about it, she said Richard thought it was unhealthy for me to cling to these things. I was furious. Those papers, with Dad's handwriting and notes, were some of the few tangible things I had left of him. Things came to a head on my 18th birthday. I'd been looking forward to our traditional mother-daughter spa day, something we'd done every year since I was 13. But the night before, Mom told me she had to cancel. Richard had surprised her with a couple's retreat, and they were leaving early the next morning. I was heartbroken. I spent my 18th birthday alone, looking through old photo albums and crying. Aunt Tessa came over with cupcakes when she heard, but it wasn't the same. That day, I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't let anyone else dictate how I remembered Dad. After that, I started pulling away. I focused on my studies, got a part-time job at a local bookstore, and spent more time with Tessa and my friends. I threw myself into my college applications, determined to forge my own path. Mom and Richard got married when I was 19, in a lavish ceremony that felt nothing like the warm, loving family I remembered. The wedding was at a fancy country club, with ice sculptures and a 7-tier cake. I stood beside Mom as her bridesmaid, feeling like a stranger in my own family. Throughout college, I kept my distance. I'd come home for holidays, but the visits were always tense and short. Richard would make comments about my choice of major, history, like Dad, saying things like, "I hope you have a backup plan. Those who don't learn from history are doomed to work at Starbucks." Mom would laugh nervously and change the subject. Now, I'm 28 and have built a life for myself. I have a good job as a museum curator, a small but cozy apartment filled with books and artifacts, and a group of amazing friends who understand my passion for history. I see Tessa regularly. We still get ice cream at Scoops every few weeks, raising a spoon to Dad's memory. My relationship with Mom is strained at best. We talk maybe once a month, and our conversations are always surface level. She'll ask about work, I'll ask about her garden, and we both pretend everything is fine. But underneath, there's a gulf of unspoken words and hurt feelings. The issue now is that Mom and Richard are celebrating their 10th wedding anniversary next month. They're throwing a big party at the same country club where they got married. Mom's been calling nonstop, insisting that I not only attend but also give a speech about how happy I am for them. I don't want to go. The thought of standing up there and lying about how great Richard is, how he's been such a wonderful addition to our family. It makes me feel sick. But I know if I don't go, it'll cause a huge rift. Mom's already guilt-tripping me, saying things like, "Don't you want me to be happy? And your father would have wanted us to move on." I feel torn. Part of me wants to just suck it up and go for Mom's sake. But another part of me is so angry that she let Richard erase Dad's memory, angry that she chose him over me so many times, angry that she expects me to pretend everything is fine when it's not. Am I wrong for not wanting to go to this anniversary party? Should I just fake it for the sake of keeping the peace? Or should I finally stand my ground and tell Mom how I really feel, even if it means potentially ruining our already fragile relationship? Update 1. First, I want to thank everyone for their support and advice. Your comments gave me a lot to think about, and I appreciate the perspective. It's been a whirlwind few weeks, and I wanted to share what's happened since my last post. After much consideration, I decided to have an honest conversation with my mom before making a final decision about the party. I invited her for coffee at a neutral location, a small cafe near my apartment. It's a place I often go to work on my research, with mismatched furniture and walls lined with local art. I thought the relaxed atmosphere might help ease the tension. When we met, I could tell Mom was tense. She started rambling about party details, the caterer, the band, the guest list. But I gently interrupted her. I told her I needed to talk about something important. Then, I laid it all out, how I felt when Dad died, how Richard's presence changed our family dynamic, and how hurt I've been over the years. I told her about the day they cleaned out the garage, how losing Dad's teaching materials felt like losing a piece of him all over again. I reminded her of my 18th birthday, spent alone while she was off with Richard. I explained that while I understood her need to move on, it felt like she had completely erased Dad from our lives. As I spoke, memories came flooding back. I told her about a school play when I was 16. I had a small role as Juliet in Romeo and Juliet. Dad had always been the one to help me rehearse, putting on ridiculous accents to play all the other parts. This was the first school play after his death, and I'd been nervous about it. Mom had promised to be there, but at the last minute, she called to say she and Richard had tickets to a concert. I remembered standing on that stage, scanning the audience for her face, and feeling my heart sink when I realized she wasn't there. I also shared happier memories, like the time Dad and I got caught in a sudden downpour during one of our ice cream dates. We'd run back to the car, laughing and soaked to the bone, Dad's glasses all fogged up. Or the Christmas when I was 10, and Dad stayed up all night to build me a dollhouse, cursing under his breath at the tiny furniture. These were the moments I cherished, the ones that made me feel loved and secure. And these were the kinds of moments I felt had been lacking since Richard came into our lives. Mom was quiet for a long time. Then, to my surprise, she started crying. She admitted that she'd been so afraid of being alone after Dad died that she latched onto Richard without considering how it would affect me. She said she thought by moving forward quickly, she was doing what was best for both of us. Through her tears, Mom shared her own struggles. She told me how lost she felt after Dad died, how she'd lie awake at night, terrified of raising me alone. She admitted that Richard's decisiveness and confidence had been a lifeline for her, even if his methods weren't always the most sensitive. We talked for hours. Really talked, for the first time in years. Mom apologized for not being there for me, for missing important moments in my life. She said she had no idea how much pain I'd been carrying. She also shared some of her own grief, how she still sometimes reaches for Dad in bed before remembering he's gone, how she can't bring herself to delete his number from her phone. Regarding the anniversary party, Mom said she understood if I didn't want to attend. She admitted that asking me to give a speech was unfair and that she'd only suggested it because Richard's kids were doing the same. She hadn't considered how different their experiences were from mine. I told her I'd think about attending, but I couldn't promise a speech. She accepted this, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like my mom was really listening to me. As we were leaving, Mom hesitated, then asked if I'd be willing to look through some old photo albums with her sometime. She said she realized she'd been avoiding memories of Dad, and that wasn't fair to either of us. It was a small gesture, but it meant a lot. The next day, I called Aunt Tessa to tell her about the conversation. She was supportive, as always, and reminded me that healing isn't linear. Some days you'll feel like you've made progress, she said, and other days it'll feel like you're right back where you started. That's okay. I'm still processing everything, but I feel like a weight has been lifted. Mom and I have agreed to start seeing each other more regularly, just the two of us, to rebuild our relationship. We're planning to visit Dad's grave together next week, something we haven't done as a pair in years. As for the party, I'm leaning towards making a brief appearance, but I'm not going to force myself to stay if it becomes too uncomfortable. And definitely no speech. I've decided to bring a framed photo of Dad to put on the memorial table, a small way of ensuring his presence is felt, even if just by me. I know we have a long way to go, but for the first time in years, I feel hopeful about my relationship with my mom. Thank you all again for your support and advice. I'll update again after the party. Update 2. It's been a few weeks since my last update, and a lot has happened. I wanted to wait until after the anniversary party to post this update, to give myself time to process everything. In the weeks leading up to the party, Mom and I met up a few times. We looked through old photos, shared memories of Dad, and even visited his grave together for the first time in years. It was emotional, but it felt like we were finally acknowledging an important part of our past that had been ignored for too long. During one of our meetings, Mom brought out a box of Dad's things she'd kept hidden away. There were old letters he'd written her when they were dating, ticket stubs from concerts they'd attended, and even the cheesy Valentine's Day card I'd made them when I was 7. We spent hours going through everything, laughing and crying in equal measure. One item in particular caught my attention: Dad's old pocket watch. I remembered him always checking it during our ice cream dates, making sure we weren't late getting home for dinner. Mom told me Dad had wanted me to have it when I was older, but in the chaos after his death, she'd forgotten about it. Holding that watch, feeling its familiar weight in my hand, brought back a flood of memories. The day of the party arrived, and I decided to go. I didn't stay for the whole event, but I did make an appearance. When I arrived, I was surprised to see that Mom had set up a small memorial table for Dad in a quiet corner of the venue. It had his photo, his favorite book, a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, and even the silly World's Best Dad mug I'd given him when I was 8. It wasn't much, but it meant everything to me that she had acknowledged him on this day. I added the framed photo I'd brought, a snapshot of Dad and me at Scoops, both of us with ice cream mustaches and goofy grins. Seeing it there, among the elegant decorations and fancy floral arrangements, felt right somehow. A little piece of our simple, happy past amid the glitz of Mom and Richard's present. Richard seemed uncomfortable with the memorial at first, but he was civil. He even shared a story about how Dad had once helped him change a tire on the side of the road, long before he and Mom got together. It was a small thing, but it felt like a tiny olive branch. I didn't give a speech, but I did have a brief conversation with Richard's kids. They seemed nice enough, and I realized that they were probably just as confused by the family dynamics as I was. We're not going to be best friends, but I think we can be cordial. The most significant moment came near the end of my time there. Mom pulled me aside and handed me a small box. Inside was Dad's watch, the one he always wore, the one I thought had been lost or thrown away years ago. Mom said she'd kept it all this time, not sure when the right moment would be to give it to me. She thought today was fitting. As I held the watch, I remembered all the times Dad had let me wear it as a child, how proud I felt with it hanging comically large on my small wrist. I remembered him teaching me to read the time, his patience as I struggled with the concept of 1:15 and 1:30. In that moment, I felt closer to him than I had in years. I left the party shortly after that, emotional but oddly at peace. On my way home, I stopped by Scoops. The place hasn't changed much in all these years, same peeling paint, same worn booths. I ordered a scoop of Rocky Road in Dad's honor and sat in our old spot, the watch ticking softly in my pocket. Mom and I have plans to meet up again next week. We're talking about starting a new tradition, maybe a monthly dinner where we can catch up and continue rebuilding our relationship. She's even mentioned wanting to volunteer at the museum where I work, saying she'd like to understand my world a bit better. I know we still have a long way to go. Years of hurt don't disappear overnight. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like we're moving in the right direction. Thank you all for your support through this journey. Update 3. It's been about 6 months since the anniversary party, and I wanted to give you all a final update on how things have progressed. Mom and I have been consistent with our monthly dinners, and they've become something I genuinely look forward to. We've had some tough conversations, but also a lot of laughter and reconnection. Last month, we even cooked Dad's famous lasagna recipe together, something we hadn't done since before he passed. It didn't turn out quite right. We both forgot he used to sneak in a splash of red wine, but the attempt itself felt meaningful. We ended up ordering pizza and sharing stories about Dad's cooking adventures, both the successes and the spectacular failures. My relationship with Richard is still a work in progress. We're not close, but we're cordial. He's made efforts to be more considerate, like asking before making changes to the house and showing interest in hearing stories about Dad. It's not perfect, but it's better than it was. Last week, he even asked if I'd like any of Dad's old books that he found in the attic. It was a small gesture, but it meant a lot. The biggest change, though, has been in my own healing process. Talking openly with Mom about Dad has allowed me to process a lot of grief I'd been holding on to. I've started seeing a grief counselor to work through some of the lingering issues from my teenage years. It's been challenging, but also incredibly freeing. I've also reconnected with some of Dad's old friends and colleagues from the high school where he taught. They've shared stories about him that I'd never heard before, and it's been like getting little pieces of him back. One of his former students, now a teacher herself, told me how Dad had encouraged her to pursue education when everyone else told her she couldn't do it. Another shared how Dad had organized a secret fundraiser for a colleague going through cancer treatment. These stories have helped me see Dad not just as my father, but as the complex, caring person he was to so many others. Mom even joined me for coffee with Dad's best friend last week, and seeing them reminisce together was both heartwarming and healing. They laughed about old inside jokes and shared memories of camping trips gone wrong. It was the first time in years I'd seen Mom talk about Dad without that shadow of guilt crossing her face. I've been wearing Dad's watch every day. It's become a comforting presence, a tangible connection to him. Sometimes, when I'm feeling stressed or unsure, I find myself running my fingers over its familiar surface, almost like I'm asking Dad for advice. It's silly, maybe, but it helps. As for the future, Mom and I are planning a small memorial for Dad on his upcoming birthday. It'll just be us, Aunt Tessa, and a few close friends. We're going to his favorite park, the one where he used to take me flying kites on windy days. We'll share stories, have a picnic, including his favorite lemon bars, and release biodegradable lanterns. It feels right to honor him this way, in a place that holds so many happy memories. I've also been thinking about ways to honor Dad's legacy in my professional life. The museum where I work is planning an exhibit on local educators who made a difference in the community. I've proposed including a section on Dad, showcasing some of his innovative teaching methods and the impact he had on his students. It's still in the planning stages, but the idea of being able to share Dad's passion for teaching with a wider audience feels incredibly meaningful. I know our family will never be what it was when Dad was alive, but I'm learning that different doesn't have to mean worse. We're building something new, something that honors the past while still moving forward. It's not always easy, and there are still days when the grief hits hard, but I'm finding ways to navigate through it. Mom and I are planning a trip to Dad's hometown next summer. Neither of us has been there since the funeral, but we both feel ready to revisit those places that were so important to him. We're going to stay in the bed and breakfast where Mom and Dad had their honeymoon, visit his old school, and maybe even try to find that creek where he always claimed to have caught a fish this big. Thank you all for your support throughout this journey. Your advice and kind words have been a huge help. While I may not update again, know that your support has made a real difference in my life and my family's healing process. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that grief isn't something you get over, it's something you learn to carry. And having people to help share that load, even internet strangers, makes all the difference.